The Duke was the first locomotive to operate in Scotland, and the first locomotive to operate on any public railway. It was built in 1816 or 1817 by George Stephenson to his 1816 patent for the Kilmarnock and Troon Railway, which was the first public railway in Scotland, which opened in 1812. A horse-drawn passenger service began in 1813, and in October of the same year, the Duke of Portland investigated the possibility of using a Blenkinsop rack locomotive on the line, but the cost of having to purchase a locomotive and to relay the track with the patent rack rails was prohibitive. So the Duke of Portland looked elsewhere. The Duke, the locomotive, not the person, was a standard Stephenson locomotive for the period, albeit carried on 3 rather than 2 axles. It was built to what was then emerging as the Scottish standard gauge of 4 feet 6 inches. It had a pair of cylinders part immersed in the boiler, which had a working pressure of 50 psi. The piston rods were guided by a crosshead arrangement, and they drove the leading and trailing wheels via a long connecting rod. In order to synchronise the action of the cylinders, a chain was used to couple the 3 axles, which means that the Duke was very likely the first 060. The 3 powered axles provided extra adhesion and also helped to reduce the weight of the locomotive and prevent damage to the brittle cast iron track. The engine had a wrought iron frame, and in order to improve the ride and prevent damage to the track, it was carried on Stephenson's patent steam springs. Local man John Hunter Kelso left a dramatic recollection of the locomotive. He wrote, "The carcass sat on 3 pairs of wheels. The fore and aft pair were turned by long connecting rods fixed to a knob on the outer flange of the wheels, and, by the aid of crossbeams, played up and down like a pair of frame saws, turning the wheels like so many grindstones. In the centre of each axle tree was a wheel with teeth, and an open chain revolved on the teeth in pinion form, keeping the valves in their place. The engineer opened the safety valve with a grand burst, which struck the air and the ears of the crowd at the same moment. It seemed to me as if the whole mass had been blown to fragments. The crowd instinctively swelled to such a size as burst the boundaries of the hedges on both sides. All sorts of murder shouts arose from the group. I was petrified and held a death grip for a time, quite uncertain whether people were killed or if I was still alive. The locomotive was, like some great folk, before its time, as they had not yet discovered a way for its will. The road that used to be trod by the old horse was in some places high in the centre, and on those heights did the teeth wheels on the axle trees rest, bending both them and the rods by which motion was attained. As a power out of place, the giant had to be laid aside for a time. Sadly, despite being carried on 6 wheels, the locomotive proved too heavy for the brittle cast iron track. The company accounts show a dramatic upswing in the cost of new rails from 1816 onwards. Although Stephenson's biographer Samuel Smiles suggests that the Duke was soon laid aside, in 1821 a local farmer complained to the company about his crops being set on fire by a locomotive, which presumably had to be the Duke. It was supposedly sold in 1824 to Lord Elgin for use on his railway in Fife, but again was found too heavy for the rails, and so in the next year was converted to a stationary engine to work in a stone quarry. In 1830 it was moved to one of Lord Elgin's collieries as a stationary engine, and that, sadly, is the last anything is heard of it. So that's been a quick look at Scotland's first locomotive, and the first locomotive to operate on a public railway, some 8 or 9 years before locomotion on the Stockton and Darlington Railway. If you would like to find out more about the early rails of Scotland, check out my forthcoming book, The Early Rails of Scotland, which I have co-authored with Ed Bethune, and is available to pre-order from Amberley Books. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you have, please like, share and subscribe. I'd like to thank all my supporters on Patreon for making this video possible, and I look forwards to seeing you all next time on Rail Story.